The next section is on virtue ethics, which is the philosophical journey section 5.5. This section opens with a thought experiment from Michael Stalker. In this thought experiment, you have a friend who visits you in the hospital and cheers you up, and you feel much better after he's visited you. And then when you thank him and praise him for doing this, he demurs. He's a little bit embarrassed by this. He says he was only doing his duty to morality. If he was a utilitarian, he says that he was making you happy, at little unhappiness to himself, thus maximizing utility. If he was a Kantian, he says that he was acting from and in accord with his duty. Is something missing here? Do you still feel as good about his visit? What the problem seems to be is that he was treating you as an object for his morality rather than as a friend. Something that the friendship seems to have been missing from your friend's explanation. Virtue theory emphasizes persons, not actions. A moral I often use for a virtue theory is be good to do good. For virtue ethics, the focus of morality is on the whole person. That is, become a virtuous person, and then you'll know what to do. You'll know how to do the right thing, and it'll come easily to you. That's as opposed to act-centered theories, such as utilitarianism and Kantianism, which we were just studying. For those theories, you do good to be good. The focus is on moral actions, not on the whole person. Virtue is a word that has an exact opposite, and the exact opposite of virtue is vice. Let's think about what vice means. The vice squad is the part of the police who enforce laws against things like drugs, gambling, and prostitution. These are crimes that people who normally obey the law might engage in. I'll bet you don't know a murderer, but I'll bet there's a good chance that you know somebody who's used illegal drugs or has gambled illegally or has hired a prostitute. Vices are weakness of characters, character flaws, or bad habits. The opposite of virtues. Virtues are strength of character, excellences, or good habits. Remember, virtues or excellences, that's where the word comes from. A virtuoso violinist is an excellent violinist. How did the violinist become excellent? Practice, practice, practice. And so a virtuous person could also be called a virtuoso person. That's a person excellent at being a person. Well, how do you become excellent? It's the same practice, practice, practice. And the Greek word that Aristotle wrote about was arete, which means excellence or virtue. Now, virtues are not personality traits. Virtues are properties such as courage, integrity, generosity, honesty. We consider these when evaluating a person's character, and we can develop these virtues with practice. Personality traits are things like shyness and charm, and it would not be fair to consider these when evaluating one's character, and these are not so changeable with practice. It might be possible, but it's not as easy to change them. Bear baiting was a practice where a bear would be trapped and then tortured to death, usually by dogs, for the entertainment value of the people watching it. I found a few pictures and thought about putting them on the slide, but I just couldn't bear to do it. It was just too awful. The philosopher Michael Sandel says that the Puritans, remember those were some of the early settlers of our country, banned bear baiting, not because of the pain it banned the bear, but because people took pleasure in it. Now, the great utilitarian Jeremy Bentham would have argued against bear baiting. He might have even, right? Because he was concerned about animals. When he said to ask about animals, not can they reason, but can they suffer. So he was concerned about this. But for Bentham's utilitarian, the pleasure that was taken by the people watching the bear be tortured would count in favor of the bear baiting. But isn't there something perverse in taking pleasure from such a gruesome practice? I mean, why should the pleasure that you've taken in something so awful count towards your pleasures, right? Doesn't taking pleasure in watching a bear being tortured to death, wouldn't that coarsen your character? Here's another problem with utilitarianism that comes from our book on page 501 of the 7th edition or 499 of the 6th. Let's consider Millie, who told the truth when pressured to lie, rescues a child in danger, donates to charity, and visits her sick Aunt Gertrude. Clearly, she has maximized utility and behaved like a good utilitarian. But now consider Millie's motivations for acting the way she did. She did so to be rewarded in the afterlife, to become famous, to get good publicity for her political campaign, and to inherit her aunt's money. Aren't these motivations suspect? So is she still behaving morally? Now, According to utilitarianism, yes, because utilitarianism cares only about consequences, not motives. So a utilitarian has very little here to criticize Milley about. Different ethical theories have different ideas about what has intrinsic and what has instrumental value. Things with intrinsic value are things that are good in and of themselves. That is, this is good and we don't have to explain it in terms of anything else. Things with instrumental value are things that are good because they bring about some other good. Remember, different theories classifies goods as intrinsic and instrumental differently. For utilitarianism, only utility, which remember is either pleasure minus pain or happiness minus unhappiness. Only utility has intrinsic value. Now, virtue has instrumental value, as it helps bring about better consequences. When people act virtuously, there will be more pleasure and less pain. So virtue is good, but only because it tends to bring about pleasure and reduce pain, according to utilitarianism. For virtue ethics, virtue has intrinsic value. Acting virtuously is what it means to live the good life. Let's also consider some problems with Kantianism, and let's look at the thought experiment of the found wallet. In this experiment, somebody finds a wallet with a large sum of money that they could really use. Kantian Karl struggles with the temptation to keep the money. He knows he could really use the money, but he reasons that keeping the money could not be universalized, so with great difficulty he returns the wallet with all the money. For virtuous Virginia, honesty is a virtue that she's practiced. She never considers keeping the money, so she just quickly returns the wallet with the money. Notice that both Kantian Karl and virtuous Virginia have done the right thing in this case. Both of them returned the money, but wasn't it better to do it happily, right? Wasn't it better to do it without that struggle? After all, a utilitarian would favor it because there's more. Virginia is happier about it than Karl is. The other person gets his money back, so he's happy too. And what if you enjoy doing good like virtuous Virginia did? What if you do the right thing because you enjoy doing good rather than out of a sense of duty? According to a Kantian, this is acting out of an inclination rather than a duty, so it lacks moral worth. Now, Kantianism doesn't have to be that strict, because Kantianism doesn't mind if you enjoy doing good as long as the reason you do it is to do your duty. But if you do good because the reason that you do good is that you take pleasure in it, then it doesn't count really. It doesn't have moral worth. And after all, don't we want people to enjoy doing good? Shouldn't an ethical theory favor the enjoyment of doing good and otherwise take our emotions into account? So virtue ethics claims to be an ethical theory for human beings. After all, aren't the two previous theories, utilitarianism and Kantianism, too complicated to help us reason morally? Do we or even can we reason about morals this way? For utilitarianism, do we or can we really calculate all those expected utilities? For Kantianism, can we or do we really try to universalize all those maxims? Virtue ethics tells us this: become a virtuous person and you'll know how to act. Morality will come naturally because you've practiced it. The book, on several pages, starting on page 503 of the 7th edition or 501 of the 6th, makes five cases for virtue ethics, which are, and I'm just going to summarize the main points here. Virtues are needed for human flourishing. Moral rules must be grounded in virtue in order to be useful. Judgments of character are more fundamental than judgments of action. Virtue ethics deal with whole persons, not just actions, and role models are the key to learning how to behave morally. And here are some videos which will introduce Aristotle and virtue ethics.